right. Welcome back. Build Your Legacy Insurance Edition podcast. Today, we've got a good buddy of mine, Mr. Hunter Runnels from Mississippi, joining us. Hunter, what's going on, buddy? How are you?
Good, Travis. How are you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing well. Getting the year started still. How are things down there in Mississippi? You've had some crazy weather so far this year.
We've been on the roller coaster like we always do in springtime.
Little snow, little wind.
Yeah, it's been we've already had 3 winters and 2 springs and a summer mixed in there.
Nice.
And but I will say this, I feel like we're through the worst of it.
Oh, you better start knocking on wood.
Winter for us is always a debated topic, but spring is here, and I see the dogwoods blooming, and things are starting to kind of green up a little bit. So
there you go.
It feels good. We're getting spring kicked off.
Yeah.
Allergies are coming now. Yeah.
Well, you and I have been talking sort of offline. We've known each other for a number of years. We've got very similar backgrounds. We both come from independent agency families, and we've been talking a lot about, what we do and, what's going on in the market, what we see being successful. And so we wanted to hop on here and talk about what we felt like made a good independent agency owner. Why don't we start, first of all, with you? What's your background? What brought you to the insurance industry in general?
Yeah, so I'm really a product of the insurance business, honestly.
Right.
I think me and you shared this in our story a little bit. My family is a family of insurance people. My parents actually started a scratch agency in 2006.
Okay.
My mom branched out from my dad's business at that time. He owned a mobile home dealership, and she wrote a fairly large book of business with one of the carriers that specializes in mobile home insurance at that time. And she had the bright idea of starting an independent agency. And luckily, in 2006, that was really good timing because, what would come in 2008 with the housing market. She started the independent agency and got it off the ground, did very well with it early on, but still struggled with markets. So 2009 is when he closed the doors of that business and came on board. And then they joined our network, MIA, at that time.
Okay.
And 2010, I was getting out of college and deciding what to do with my life. And I kind of always knew that I would be in the family business, So I decided to lock in with them, and I joined up with them and cut my teeth early on. And it started out really as early as being in high school, quoting policies and doing inspections. My mom would send me out with a camera, taking pictures of properties.
I remember those days.
Oh yeah. And learning it from the ground up. And then I spent about 4 years with them. Well, let me think. No, I spent about 2 years with them, just learning. And
Right.
then about 2.5 years into that journey, I decided I did want to see some other things for a little while at least. And so I made a trip up to Nashville and put some resumes in at some different agencies in Nashville, and ended up getting a job with a fairly large regional agency in Nashville, and really learned a lot there. That's where I feel like my love for the insurance business really blossomed. I got to work under some really great mentors that kind of took me under their wing and taught me a lot about the business. And so took what I learned there after a couple years and came back to the family agency,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of came back a little gung ho, like, hey, I'm going to change everything y'all are doing. I know how to do it better, And while I did have some good ideas, I was reminded pretty quickly that life in a small town in Mississippi goes slower than Nashville, Tennessee. And so I locked right back into that small town. I say small; it's a suburb off of a bigger area in our metro area. But so we had a very good market, and I was able to lock in and start selling insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Specialized in personal lines first, and then eventually we really had a desire to grow the commercial lines side of things, and so I gravitated towards that and spent the latter half of my retail career on the commercial side. And then in 2008, having been members of MIA and working with everybody here all those years, had a great relationship with the team at MIA. I decided I heard an opportunity was opening up within MIA that I felt like I really had a passion for. teaching and helping insurance agencies grow and be more profitable. So I took that opportunity, and here I am. What's that? 7 years. I've been with MIA now for 7 years as their RVP. So I'm responsible for recruiting new agencies, just like you are,
Yep.
here in Mississippi, to our network, whether that be scratch agencies or existing independent agencies. So, and help them make their agencies better. So I've seen a lot of different agency owners over the years.
I was on 7 years for you, 9 years for me. It seems like just yesterday we were up in Boston and we were the new guys
We were the
running
new
around
guys,
up there, right? So-
Yeah. I was just trying to figure this world out.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah.
So, like you, I come from the family-based agency. We've worked with a lot of agencies over the last 7 to 9 years. So the topic we wanted to dive into today was, we've seen a lot of different ways to sort of, skin the cat, right? But
Yeah.
I think you and I, in our conversation offline, we picked out a few different things that we see that leads to agents being successful and what those characteristics are. So why don't we start there? I mean, again, you've seen multiple sides of the industry. What are you seeing from an independent agency owner perspective that leads to success? What are some of those characteristics that you would point out?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that comes to my mind right out of the gate, I mean, having worked with so many different agencies over the years, and it's funny, like I was thinking about this morning before we got ready to jump on this podcast. It's not just limited to agencies that have a long history or a long time span of being in business. One of our best agencies in our network is actually one of our newest agencies in our network. So it's
Right.
not when I look at some of our agencies in our network that do it well, that really are successful, they're profitable, they have strong revenue. They're each of those individuals, whether they're existing and have been in business 40 years or been in business 3 years, they're very relational.
Yeah.
They're relationship focused, and not just so much customer to agent relationship. That is one piece of it. I think that's the most. That's the first thing people think about when they think about relationship driven in the insurance business is how you relate to your customer, and that is a very important piece of it. But when I look at some of the examples of good independent agency owners, successful agency owners, I see they're relational in every aspect of their business.
Yeah.
And the ones that I've worked with in the past that I respected and learned a lot from, frankly, I hate to be just so simple about this. They're just great people to be around,
Right.
And I mean, they're infectious in a way. And so their staff loves them. The company reps enjoy working with them. It's reciprocal. And then their customers, obviously, that's a big part of it. So I think that one of the key qualities, first and foremost, and we're going to talk about several others, but I think the foundation of those others is the ability to be relational, right?
I would agree with that. And I think that's a big topic that Bill and I talk about on a number of our podcasts is relationships. And to your point, I think everybody automatically assumes that's from the agency to the client. And they're not wrong, right? I mean, it's first and foremost a relationship business. But again, you hit the nail on the head. It's to your carrier rep. It's to that underwriter. It's to your staff member. It's everybody. It's not just your client that you're developing, strengthening, investing, being intentional with the relationship there that ultimately leads to success for sure.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
I would echo that. And I think you, again, said it best where you start with that. That's your foundation. And then that sort of shoots off into all these other areas depending on where the agency is. It's we see a lot of wonderful agents that are entrepreneurial, right? They kind of they've got their hands in multiple things. They're self-starting, they're driven, they're forward thinking. They're always looking for ways to improve their day, their process, their business. And those are the ones that are constantly reinvesting in to create growth, for lack of a better term.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. The entrepreneurial side of things is something that I find very interesting in the independent agencies channel. We joke sometimes that our agencies need to get more focused at times.
Right.
But some of the most successful people in our network have their hand in 14 different things.
Right.
And it's just how they're wired. It's just and you can't change that about them. That's what makes them successful. And so, but it does bleed over into all their whole agency. I mean, those type of people generally want to be process driven. They
Mm-hmm.
want they want their flow of their agency to have to make sense. They
Mm-hmm.
don't want it to just be willy nilly. Wake up every day and see what we're going to do today. They want there to be a method to the madness, so to speak. And so, I think that the entrepreneurial side of things is key as well. I mean, but we deal with a lot of scratch agencies.
Right.
Um, I can tell pretty quickly on with a scratch prospect, whether they're coming from the captive world or from the like a producer role. If they don't have that entrepreneurial spirit about them, you can pick up on it very quickly. You can almost tell immediately whether or not they're going to be an independent agency owner at some point, or a good one at that.
Bill and I have had conversations about, what leads to success, right? And that entrepreneurial, I think even with the entrepreneurial aspect, you said it earlier, right? They're infectious. And entrepreneurs, when you're around them, you feel that energy that,
That's
hey,
right.
how do we get to that next level? But the other piece I find with entrepreneurial spirits is the self-awareness, right? I
Mhm.
mean, at the end of the day, if you're starting an independent insurance agency, it's a sales organization, right? And those
Yeah.
entrepreneurial spirits who are self-motivated, they're driven, they're process oriented, they are going to get up and go sell, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
agents who are not as entrepreneurial, we find oftentimes they find ways to gravitate toward other things than selling, which ultimately
Mhm.
caps how large they can become, the success they can have, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I think the entrepreneurial aspect of it, the relationship driven aspect of it, I think all those things continue to go into, I mean, the agents that we see have success, they're niche oriented. They've got great centers of influence, right? They love the networking side of building an agency.
The COI part of it falls right in line with the relationship,
It
the centers of
does.
influence thing. I mean, you know, you can't be centers of influence driven if you're not relational, right?
Right.
So not everybody is an independent agency owner. I work with a ton of great people in this industry that are not built to be
Yeah.
that center of influence type of individual. That's fine. There's a place for everybody in this industry, I feel like. But when we're talking about agency owners,
Hmm.
I feel like that the most successful ones are the ones that push themselves, really do those things well.
Yeah.
Relationships, centers of influence, entrepreneurial, and then you mentioned the last one there, the niche focused.
Yep.
Or wherever you are in the country, depending on how you want to say that word. I know
Niche,
that's a
niche.
debated topic. Yeah. When I talk to agency owners, I don't like to think of it as you finding one thing that you can go target. We really like to talk about, hey, finding kind of like an industry
Right.
that you can really focus in on. There might be 5 or 6 buckets in that particular industry. To me, that is more niche focused than just
Hmm.
being a generalist, so to speak. And I do believe that some of the most successful agencies do tend to gravitate more towards being niche focused. I truly believe it frees them up to be efficient in in writing accounts that are actually going to make them revenue.
I think it goes back to let's go back to the relationship aspect, right? I mean, you brought up a great point. These agents are selfless and they're looking to
Yeah.
give back. And that starts a lot of times with, I mean, one of the common themes when I'm having a conversation with a prospect is, why do you want to start an agency? Or why did you start your agency? Why'd you get in the industry? I want to help people, right?
Mhm.
So to be able to help secure someone's risk appropriately, you got to understand the risk a little bit, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You got to
Yeah.
be able to peel that onion back. And
Yeah.
I find those guys or those ladies that are niche focused and, they're not trying to be the jack of all trades. They know that industry, they know that class, they know that, overall value of a risk. They know it better. And so they're able
Yeah.
to guide people, they're able to assist them better in their process of buying insurance, which makes for a better buying experience and leads to success, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. You mentioned something just then that I thought it was something that I think is very important. The selflessness side
mhm.
of things in an agency owner. That's something that I think gets overlooked when you're talking about a successful independent agency owner. some of the most successful agency owners I've seen or been around, I can tell are genuinely very selfless people. You see it with their staff, with their business dealings.
Yeah.
And, it's pretty it's like the old saying, what goes around comes around kind of. I mean, it really, and it's not about that being your motivation, but because I think it's truly successful if your motivation is just to simply be selfless. But it really does come back around to you full circle. And I think some of the most successful independent agencies that I've been around have that characteristic.
Again, like you said, we work with a lot of startup agencies, but we also work with existing agencies. And some of the best existing agencies that I call on, to your point, you can tell with how they invest in their staff. You can tell in how they invest in their communities and those things of that nature, where they're constantly finding ways to give back. And they are
Sure.
the most successful agencies. And that's who we target to try to partner with, right? Because we want to be a small piece of that to help them have success and find more ways to keep giving back to clients, staff, community alike.
Yeah. It's funny. I have conversations all the time about staffing. Before we jumped on here, we were talking about staffing.
Yep.
And it's one of the hot topics in our industry right now is finding good talent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Producers become a really hot topic in the agency world. Everybody wants a really good producer, right?
Right.
And it's really hard to find.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've thought about why it's really hard to find is because I think a lot of producers do have an entrepreneurial side as well. They want to eventually own an agency as well, or have some skin in the game.
Right.
And therefore feel like they get stuck in a lot of situations and are a little bit more apprehensive to, step into that arena. I think this is where it really applies is some of the most successful agencies I've seen are willing to invest in that relationship, that producer relationship early on, and build out a plan that leads to equity or partnership or some kind of ownership in their book in a small way that gives them a sense of ownership over what they're doing. It gives them a sense of pride.
Mm-hmm.
It gives them a future with the agency in a way.
I was just reading an article yesterday that was hitting that exact same tone, right? Talking about staffing, bringing talent into the industry and providing them a future, right? Providing them some form of equity or opportunity. And I think that's to that point, we talk a lot about what we do, and we talk a lot about the things like the Training and Learning Center, the BIA, the foundation, the Premier Family, all these different things we have. And when I'm talking to an agent, I'm talking to them about their staff, right? Hey, this is how you're going to help people matriculate in a career. And, I think that's a challenge for any small business, not just an independent agency, but any small business in helping people grow a career, right? And
that's right.
Kind of going back to the agents that we see have the most success, they're entrepreneurial, they're infectious in what they do, and they want to help people. They want to provide people more than a job, right? When it comes to the staffing side.
More of a future is the way I see it. And, I think that the agencies that lock into that grab onto that idea and run with it, I truly believe they have a leg up when it comes to hiring the best talent.
I agree.
So I guess this is more or less right now a public service announcement to the agencies out there that are on the fence about whether or not that's a good idea. It's worth a try, because one of the pushbacks I get is, I can't afford to do that. And my thing is honestly, I think you can't afford not to do it. If we're going to continue on as an industry independent agency distribution channel is going to be around for a long period of time, we're going to have to, as agency owners, invest in those individuals in a way that we haven't before.
I think Matt Masiello does. I mentioned it on another podcast. I'll plug it again here today. He talks about it's getting harder and harder to run an agency just off of commissions. Right.
That's right.
To your point, technology is more expensive than it's ever been. Client acquisition's more expensive than it's ever been, as is talent acquisitions. And so, you've got to be able to make those investments. You got to have the capital to be able to do it. You have to be forward thinking to be able to do it. Right. You can't just decide to do these things on a whim. And kind of to again plug us and what we do. I think that's where we fit into that picture of, we're that strategic partner that's going to be there to help you. We're going to help you, go beyond just writing a policy to build long-term equity for yourself, your family,
That's right.
your staff members, all of those things, and create that revenue, create those opportunities to give back long term.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to be forward thinking in that lane. Yeah. I mean, I really do. And another thing last thing I would say, when it comes to successful independent agency owners, this kind of piggybacks off of the relationship side of things a little bit, but it's something that I've seen a lot of lately. And it's something that me and you have talked about a good bit in our time together when we have conversations, is relating to carriers.
Yeah.
Man, it's one of the biggest pieces to owning an agency that I think a lot of people don't take seriously. I see it, or they just don't do it well.
Right.
Now, some do it very well. In the old days, I think there was this mentality that you could just kind of speak to a carrier person however you wanted to and kind of get your way, kind of bully your way into getting them to do what you wanted them to do. And I just think that obviously that's not right. Wasn't right then. It isn't right now. I think that, the old saying, you get more flies with honey, it really is true. A lot of agency owners' perspectives have to change with the relationship to their carrier, because that is the key to your success, right? I mean, that carrier is your lifeblood.
I completely agree. I mean, Bill and I, again, we talk about it all the time, the relationships, and it is just as important, if not more important, for the carrier relationship and strengthening it. And I mean, it's all a partnership, right? In any good partnership, no matter if it's you and I, or if it's us and, a company or even a partnership that you have with a client, it's got to be a win-win for both parties. And if you're only wanting a one-way street out of this thing, you're only going to get so much out of it. And so, that's one of those things. I am with you on that 100%. You've got to be diligent and invest time and develop and strengthen those relationships with your carrier partners.
That's right. They will remember it.
They will.
and it comes twofold back around to you.
Well, and that's, Bill and I did a podcast recently on it, and we were talking about it, and he's like, you might be building a relationship with a territory rep right now that it's actually 3 to 4 relationships, because they're going to move to 3 to 4 different companies throughout their career, that it's going to help you during that time frame.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I think those are those are the things that I see, really good, successful agency owners do well. I
agree.
And there's a slew of other.
I was going to say we could talk on this topic for a long time, right? But look, I think we've covered it well. I appreciate you taking the time today and hopping on here with us. And if you guys want to check Hunter out, he's down there in Mississippi. You can find him on LinkedIn, those types of things. Connect with him. But I appreciate you taking some time, buddy, and we'll talk here soon. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Travis. Appreciate you.
See you, buddy.
Thanks for tuning in. You can catch our Build Your Legacy Insurance Edition podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, or send us over a topic recommendation at podcast@siaofnc.com. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, visit us online at www.siaofnc.com. We hope you enjoyed our newest episode. See you next week.